Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're going through my 2024 iPhone buying guide. We'll be covering everything from the $1,000 plus iPhones to $100 models, starting with Apple's current lineup and making our way eventually to the secondhand and refurbished market. So every price point should be covered. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be using US dollars, so keep in mind prices vary wildly by region, and then naturally I'll be giving my overall thoughts and recommendations for the high-end, mid-range, and low-end of budgets at the end. If you would like to skip ahead, timestamps are in the description below. So without further ado, let's go to the best of the best with the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. Released only September 2023, these phones represent the best of what Apple has to offer, and they'll cost you a pretty penny, going for $1,000 minimum with the smaller 6.1-inch 15 Pro, and then $1,200 for the larger 6.7-inch 15 Pro Max. That's the phone I personally purchased. The smaller one there is actually the 14 Pro, but it gives us an idea of scale. These are both fantastic phones, and don't be fooled by the price point. While the Max is $200 more, the base model comes with 256 gigs of storage, whereas the $1,000 15 Pro comes with only 128. If you want 256 on the smaller Pro, you're looking at $1,100. Generally, the smaller and larger models have zero differences aside from better battery life coming with the bigger option, but that's actually not the case this year. On the back of these phones, you have the fantastic triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel ultra wide, 48 megapixel main wide lens, and then 12 megapixel telephoto. The telephoto lens gives 3x zoom on the smaller Pro, whereas the Max's telephoto gives you 5x zoom. This may be a make or break point for some users, but for myself, and I think the vast majority, the difference is pretty minor and probably won't actually matter much to most people. So I very much recommend going for the size that you prefer, whatever's more comfortable, rather than focusing on the 3x versus 5x cameras. Go to the store, hold each phone in the hand if you're unsure which better suits you. It's up to you what you want, assuming you want the 15 Pro to begin with, and that's a pretty big assumption in all fairness. This is an extremely expensive phone. Even so, it's the best of what Apple currently has to offer, and if you've got the cash to spend, or are perhaps finding a deal through a retailer or carrier that has you paying for a contract or installments, that might be a solid way to get your hands on the best iPhone ever made to this point. Oh yeah, and there's USB-C now, so your old Lightning chargers will no longer work, but you've probably already got some USB-C devices in your household anyways, and even if you don't, rest assured this is a very good thing, as it's a very universal port that'll be compatible with most new tech moving forward. For example, the Nintendo Switch, if you have one of those, uses USB-C, so its charger could be used to charge the iPhone 15 or 15 Pro. Whether the Pros are worth it over the Android competition in the high end is completely up to you, and if you prefer iOS and iPhone, for most people who've already owned iPhone in the past, I think it does just make sense to stick with what you're familiar with. And if you want a phone that'll last years to come and be an absolute beast in every category with amazing cameras, battery life, performance, gorgeous display, premium build, you name it, the 15 Pro is the way to go. I mean, who really needs two full functioning kidneys anyways, right? Also, if you've heard about minor issues like overheating, this is something Apple is addressing with software updates. Don't concern yourself with it. Now, if you're not really interested so much in the third telephoto zoom lens, the iPhone 15 or 15 Plus might be the better option. They're a bit cheaper at $800 and $900 US dollars respectively. That's with 128 gigs. Notably, the displays only have a 60 Hz refresh rate versus the 120 Hz ProMotion on the 15 Pro models. If you don't know what this means, I'd recommend you go to the store and just try swiping around on both phones to see the difference. Basically, the 15 Pro produces double the amount of frames per second, making for significantly smoother movement. You do also only have an always-on display exclusive to the 15 Pro, but aside from that, unless you're into mobile gaming or something that involves the higher frame rate, the actual core experience is completely unaffected. It's just nice to have. So if you can live without that, as well as the zoom lens, the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus are solid options. Unlike the Pro versus the Pro Max this year, the 15 and 15 Plus are the exact same devices aside from the larger battery in the latter, so you can just go for the device that you feel fits you best. With the 15, you're getting a fantastic camera setup with a 12 megapixel ultra wide and 48 megapixel main sensor, albeit the sensor isn't quite as large as the Pro model, but it'll still take amazing photos, and the phone as a whole performs extremely well with the same internal specs as the 14 Pro from last year. You've also got USB-C like with the 15 Pro, although do note that you still only have USB 2 speeds on the 15 versus USB 3 with compatible cords on the 15 Pro. All in all, the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus provide a great halfway experience with the old and the new, with a more premium feel over the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus thanks to the dynamic island notch, which is a really nice addition and something I think you'll appreciate after using the phone for a while. I do believe these phones are worth it, but I personally would recommend going up to the iPhone 15 Pro if you can swing it. There are quite a few improvements for your extra cash with the ProMotion display, better, faster chip inside, and a much improved camera setup headlining the main differences. But if those things don't really matter to you and maybe you don't care about the dynamic island too much, then the next tier down with the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus from 2022 might be the right phone phones for you, the 14 costing $700 US and the 14 Plus $800. I will say for $100 less, you're actually losing out on a good few features. The older notch is there, the chipset is a generation behind, and the cameras include the 12 megapixel ultra wide of a similar quality, but then only a 12 megapixel main sensor, which is a significant step down from the 15. You're also looking at the Lightning port rather than USB-C, though that might be a positive for those with old accessories that will be incompatible with the newer phones. The 14 and 14 Plus are solid phones, but I do feel like they're in a really weird spot, manning the gap between the iPhone 13 and then the 15 and 15 Plus. For only $100 more, I do think the 15 is going to be the phone to get, as it does bring a few good improvements, but if you really just don't care about the differences we've discussed, then maybe you should instead look at the iPhone 13, which will run you $600. Of course, the 13 doesn't have a Plus option, and the 13 mini is no longer being sold. The phone is extremely similar to the 14. It's got the same notch, pretty much the same cameras, and even the chipset inside is hardly a downgrade, being the A15 Bionic versus the 13 Pro version of the A15 that's in the iPhone 14, and yeah, I mean, it provides a negligibly faster experience. It's technically better, but good luck ever noticing the difference. The iPhone 13 is solid value for what it brings to the table, and I highly recommend it as the perfect mid-range iPhone right now. It'll get software updates for many years to come, and there's so very little you gain with your extra $100 for the 14. The camera quality is great, and I think it's going to probably be one of the most popular choices for new phones for the entire year. So that's the brunt of Apple's current lineup, but of course we can't forget about their supposed budget option, the third generation iPhone SE released early 2022. It's worth mentioning, some rumors do point to a new generation SE coming spring 2024 with a size similar to the 13 with USB-C and an improved camera, but it's too early to say for sure whether or not that will actually pan out. That might be worth waiting for, but even if you're not interested, the SE is absolutely terrible value at the moment, and I strongly recommend against purchasing it at full price. If it's on sale or there's a deal through a carrier or something, the phone might be worth it. It does see price drops significantly more frequently from retailers than any other iPhone because it's the cheapest, but Apple's $430 that they want is just an absurd price when the 13 for $170 more gives you so much greater value in every possible category, including double the base storage at 128 gigs versus the SE coming with only 64. I've done a video on why exactly the SE is so poorly priced right now if you're interested, but in short, it's just a shockingly bad deal for a phone that is nearly identical to the 2017 iPhone 8 aside from the chipset. The iPhone SE does have a lot of good that makes it appealing for a certain subset of users, and I think that's important to note here. The cons include an old 2017 camera sensor, a pretty small and lackluster battery life, and then there's the features that, depending on who you ask, could be very bad or very good. You've got the older LCD screen and Touch ID home button setup that'll really appeal to those who prefer the familiar iOS experience or just don't need a whole lot out of their phone. Along with this, you've got the A15 chipset, same as the iPhone 13, and this gives some quality of life improvements like 5G networking, which is limited, but still, it is 5G, and thanks to the chipset, the phone is fast and very capable of doing anything you throw at it. Photos with it are actually surprisingly decent, but far behind what the iPhone 13 and better can do, and the camera quality quickly falls apart in low light as there's not even a night mode here. You're getting better photos than what the 2017 iPhone 8 could do thanks to the software processing with the newer chip, but not by a dramatic margin. For $430, I highly recommend avoiding the SE, at least brand new. And so now let's shift into the used market, starting with that SE, which can already be found for even $200 or so, even less, half the price of buying brand new, for what is by all accounts and purposes a still very good phone. I do really like the SE, and it is perfect for the user who wants that home button experience. So if that appeals to you, definitely look for either a sale or to the secondhand marketplace like eBay or something local like Facebook Marketplace to save some cash. This phone will get a lot of years of software support, and its main issue is probably battery life. If that's something you can live with, then I would say it's a worthy purchase moving into 2024. Just don't give Apple your money. Alright, so continuing the secondhand market here, let's move to the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, the most recently discontinued iPhones, as Apple always drops their Pro models after a single year of being on sale. Looking at eBay.com, I found the phones in decent condition as low as $700 US, but more typically around $800 and then an extra $100 for the 14 Pro Max. I think around $700 is a pretty great price for a phone that really holds up well, even against the top-end 15 Pro. The new features this year basically come down to USB-C, the faster A17 Pro chip, minor camera improvements, and of course the titanium builds, which really isn't much of a selling point in my eyes. The 14 Pro is both extremely solid and premium, even having that dynamic island and ProMotion, and it all still feels very much like a Pro experience, even a year later. I highly recommend the iPhone 14 Pro or Pro Max if you're looking for a Pro experience at the reduced price tag, as they can be very good value and are shockingly close to the newest model from Apple with very few dramatic improvements to speak of. And then you've got another great value iPhone with the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max. The smaller 13 Pro can be found for around $600 without too much trouble, and the Pro Max will cost you probably an extra $100 on top of that. For $600 or lower, if you can find it, I think the 13 Pro is one heck of a great buy. It's got the triple cameras, which are still absolutely fantastic, even if you don't have the 48 megapixel main sensor that's in the 14 Pro and 15 Pro. You've also still got Pro Motion, giving that buttery smooth iOS experience, in conjunction with the great A15 chipset, the same one still being sold in the iPhone 14. Then there's the slick builds and small notch. There's a lot to like even without the dynamic island, something that's nice to have but doesn't drastically affect the core experience. I highly recommend the iPhone 13 Pro right now if you're looking at the secondhand market, as I think it's pretty good value and will provide a really solid experience going into 2024 and even far beyond. I'd like to take a minute before we continue here to mention that Apple themselves do have a certified refurbished section on their website where they sell phones that were owned previously but are completely cleaned up and basically made to be almost brand new before being sold for a reduced price. If you're not comfortable with buying used but don't want to pay the sticker price for what Apple is selling new, then this is a good solution for you. These phones are basically guaranteed to be flawless, with at most maybe some minor little scuffing. You're definitely paying more than you would on, say, eBay, but you are also getting a phone that you can be confident in regarding the condition and just the state of the phone in general. Currently, as of making this video, Apple's US refurbished section is pretty lacking for choice beyond the iPhone 12 and then the 12 Pro. Even so, those phones could be worth looking at, especially the 12 at only $450, a significant step up over the $430 iPhone SE, if that helps. The 12 Pro, it looks like, will run you closer to $600, which isn't the best deal ever, but not too bad for a very premium phone experience. You've got the triple cameras, good battery life, and solid performance with the A14, but you do also have the larger notch and you don't get Pro Motion, meaning you're stuck with only 60 Hz. The build quality here is almost identical to the 13 Pro and the 14 Pro with the stainless steel finish, and it's gonna feel really nice. But I do personally feel like the 13 Pro is the better option, as it feels much closer to the current Pro experience with that smaller notch and 120 Hz panel. On eBay.com, the 12 Pro can be found for, I was seeing, around $400 to $450 without too much trouble, and then of course the Pro Max is gonna be a bit more. That's pretty good for a high quality feeling phone. So if the Pro Motion isn't a significant deal to you, then I would say that this could be a phone worth buying, whether from Apple or on the used market. Still, I would say paying a bit more for the 13 Pro would be my general recommendation here. Speaking of the 13 Pro, why not take another look at the iPhone 13, as well as the 13 mini, which, as I said, is no longer being sold by Apple as of September 2023. The 13 mini on eBay.com still hasn't dropped too dramatically in price from what I've seen, but can be found at the $400 mark in good condition. The larger 13 is closer to $500. These seem like very high prices to me, with the 13 Pro not being a whole lot more, and Apple selling the 13 for $600 brand new right now, and then there's the 12 and 12 mini costing significantly less. So I think I got pretty unlucky with the listings I was looking at. I would hope for a better deal if you were interested in these phones. Maybe the market will settle to a lower average over the next couple months. As it stands, I do think the 13 mini is an absolutely fantastic choice for those who prefer small phones. I mean, Apple isn't selling it anymore and haven't made any new minis since the 13 mini, so it might end up being the greatest small phone ever made. It's gonna get years more of software support, and it performs really well in every category, even battery life assuming the health is solid. Closer to $300, I think the 13 mini is worth serious consideration, and the 13 for a bit more might be worth it if you're getting a deal and want to save some cash versus buying it straight from Apple. Still, do keep in mind Apple does sell it brand new for $600 if you'd rather do that. Moving on, we've got the iPhone 12 and 12 mini. Now, the 12 is, as said, currently being sold by Apple refurbished for $450, though that could vary, but the 12 mini isn't. So if we go to the used market on eBay.com, I'm finding it for around $250 in decent condition. The larger 12 is closer to $300 and above, depending on what you find. Prices will vary pretty wildly, so I apologize for the generalized look. It's going to depend more on your area and marketplace of choice more than anything else. For these prices, I think the iPhone 12 is a pretty decent deal for what is still a very good phone, one that was sold by Apple for $600 as late as September 2023. And while the mini hasn't been sold since late 22, it's a really solid small phone experience if that's what you want. The 13 mini is a pretty good jump over it, so if it's not too much more, I'd rather get that. And with the 12 and 12 mini especially, battery life is something to watch out for. But if the phone reports a solid battery health, then I'd say these phones are worth purchasing, especially if you can find a deal closer to the $200 mark. It's at the moment dramatically less money than 13 mini from what I've just seen here, so it might be a good way to save some cash and get a pretty similar experience. Okay, so now we've got the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro Max. We're making our way through these as we finally hit the previous generation of iPhone design. Although this phone does retain the nice frosted glass, class of later Pro models. Even with that, you're looking at a smaller display size at 5.8 inches and then 6.5 inches for the Pro and the Pro Max, with a curved body that isn't as sleek but is in the very least very comfortable in the hand. There's a pretty big jump in both battery life and camera improvements with the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro, so these phones are still in a pretty good situation. The A13 powering them should give another couple of years of software support, even as they're now hitting 4 years old, and real-life performance seems extremely spiffy even still. And this was the first triple camera setup with the 11 Pro. We've also got night mode for the first time, and from my most recent reviews, I can honestly say the 11 Pro holds up a lot better than I would expect from a 4-year-old smartphone, that's for sure. It's a solid device. On eBay.com, the 11 Pro can be found for around $300, and I found some decent looking deals for even a good bit under that, so it might be worth looking around a bit. The Pro Max I found for closer to $350 with relative ease, though smaller ones can often cost around that too. Again, there's such a ridiculous amount of variation in the used market when it comes to pricing. Some people way overrate the cost of their phones, but in any case, I think the iPhone 11 Pro is a really solid option, keeping in mind you'll want a solid battery health and no cracks or signs that the phone has been abused. I say that because these phones are 4 years old now, so you're more likely to be looking at things like battery replacements and more cosmetic problems. It just becomes more and more common as time goes on, right? So that's something to keep in mind, but I do definitely recommend the iPhone 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max if you can find the right listing. Going down a notch, you've got the iPhone 11, which is slightly bigger than the smaller 11 Pro at 6.1 inches. That's the same size as the iPhone 12, as well as the smaller Pros starting with the 12 Pro and beyond. Mind you, that's the screen measured diagonally. It's worth mentioning the 11 looks and feels quite a bit chunkier than those phones, and that's due to not only the curved design, but also the chunkier bezels with the LCD panel, same as on the iPhone XR. The LCD screen is significantly less sharp and vibrant than the OLED on the 11 Pro and better, including the iPhone 12. Those better OLEDs are more dense in pixels and give true blacks with better colors. If the display isn't a huge deal to you though, the 11 does an absolutely fine job and looks better than overdramatic tech reviewers from the past half decade might have you believe. The camera setup is also solid, with the first ultra-wide lens on iPhone giving good versatility, as well as night mode. It's a solid upgrade over the iPhone XR, and it's a very interesting option for those on a budget. Looking to eBay.com, the 64GB iPhone 11 goes for often around the $200 mark, though you'll be sifting through some overpriced options as is typical. I've seen it less than $200, but if you want it in good condition, you'll probably be paying at least that, and honestly, for a phone this capable, I'd say that's a heck of a price point. You're looking at about 2 more years of full iOS support, with it likely to lose out on iOS 19, something that won't be out until the fall of 2025. The battery, when healthy, can be solid, and the phone is just really well built. It's the perfect recommendation for those looking at the more budget side of iPhone, and I'd say it'll probably outdo the majority of brand new Androids that cost $200, even with the older display. Okay, so now let's look at the iPhone SE, the second generation from early 2020. It features the same chipset as the iPhone 11 with the A13 Bionic. This means that it still performs very well, though not as fast as the 3rd Gen SE with its A15 and 5G. We don't have that, but that's actually the only difference between this phone and the newer SE, the chipset. Just like the only difference with this phone and the iPhone 8 is the chipset. You're basically getting the 2017 iPhone 8 with the brain of an iPhone 11, which does mean middling camera quality, especially with no night mode, and pretty not great battery life, but spiffy performance and the classic home button design. Where the SE2 starts to look really good is when we turn to eBay.com, where it can be found for under $100 without too much trouble. That's an insane value proposition, because as much compromise as the SE brings, especially with the battery life, it still performs really well and runs iOS 17 with absolute ease. Thus, it can run any app and do most anything you could possibly want it to do. Practically speaking, and aside from some of the newer luxury features, the 2nd Gen iPhone SE is basically every bit as capable as the $1,000 plus 15 Pro Max. It's a great phone at a great price, and for those on an extreme budget, I absolutely recommend it fully. Okay, moving along here, we've got the 2018 iPhone XS and XS Max, and then the iPhone XR. This is the final year of iPhones we'll be looking at for this video, as they are the oldest phones still supported on iOS 17. And luckily, they all run iOS 17 pretty darn well, with I'd say the biggest downsides tending to be battery life, as is often common with older phones. And I think it's especially a problem on the XS and XS Max. If you've still got these phones, I'd say it's high time to consider an upgrade, and I'd recommend against purchasing them unless you're fine with keeping a charger around the majority of the time and don't care too much about future iOS updates. On one hand, the build and quality of the XS and XS Max is really nice, with the glossy glass and stainless steel, an OLED screen that's held up fantastically well. It looks great, but the rest of the phone is really starting to feel its age. The camera quality is a bit lacking, with only a regular wide and telephoto lens that especially don't fare well in low light conditions with no night mode to be found. The XS also won't be getting iOS 18, at least probably, going by Apple's patch patterns the last few years. So with all this stacked against it, I think it's fair to say you'd be best looking at a minimum iPhone 11 or 2nd Gen SE if you're on a budget. Even so, for posterity's sake, on eBay.com, the XS will run you around $150, $200. Could be less at times if you look around, and depending on the condition, then the Max is probably closer to $250. Note that while the Max does have slightly better battery life than the XS, it's still pretty bad. These phones didn't have good batteries when they came out. 5 years later, you wouldn't expect them to be holding up too well, and that does tend to be the case. I don't recommend this phone, but if you're paying less than $200, you are getting a very premium phone with a bit of life left to give. Just keep a charger nearby, and I think there could be some potential value here. But still, probably go up to the iPhone 11 or better if you can. And last but not least, we finally come to the iPhone XR, a phone very similar to the iPhone 11 with the build and display, but there's only one camera lens on the back there, being the same main wide lens as on the XS. And actually considered this phone to be a more enticing option than the XS or XS Max, well, at least the smaller XS, mainly because while the battery life still isn't great, if anything, it's probably a bit better. The display, of course, is a downgrade from the XS, but otherwise, they're very similar phones. Even still, you're not getting iOS 18, probably, and the phone is definitely starting to feel its age, even if I'd say it manages to hold up well enough where it counts, like performance. On eBay.com, the XR will cost you a very similar price to the XS. I was seeing $150 to $200, although again, prices vary so wildly listing to listing. It's a bit strange that it costs similar to the XS, but I think it makes sense when you consider the battery life has aged better, and it's also a bit larger than the smaller XS. It's a solid phone, and if you're paying around $150, I don't think it's the worst option, but I really do recommend going up to the iPhone 11 or better. You're getting a better camera, better performance, and an extra year of software support at minimum. And so yeah, that's about it. Time for my final thoughts. Firstly, for the high-end price range, I think it's pretty clear the iPhone 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max are the ideal choices. They're amazing phones that have the potential to last you many, many years to come, and if you've got the money for them, I do recommend it. The iPhone 15 or 15 Plus are decent options as well, though if you can swing it, I would still lean towards the Pro models. If you're looking more at the mid-range, the iPhone 13 is your best choice for sure, with the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus being barely at all an upgrade. If you're buying new, I'd mainly lean towards the 15 Pro at $1,000 or the 13 at $600. The options between those phones are still great devices and could be very well worth it depending on your personal situation, but I think it's the two extremes that present the best value overall. The iPhone SE 3rd Gen should be avoided at all costs, at least buying it brand new. If you're looking at the used market, then things do get more interesting across the entire lineup. Firstly, the iPhone 14 Pro and 13 Pro at anywhere from $600 and up I think represent some great value for what is a very similar Pro experience to the newest iPhone. Plus, those phones give you Pro Motion, which is a very nice feature to have. From there, I think most used iPhones can be worth it depending on what deal you find, with the main standouts for me being the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, 12 and 12 mini at around that $200 to $300 mark. They are all kind of crammed together. The 12 can go up quite a bit past that, but it all depends on what kind of deal you can find, and I think that's something to emphasize here. If you're looking at the used market, definitely do some bargain hunting. Don't just settle, look around, try to find a good deal from a reputable seller, make sure it has good battery health, nothing that points to some poor cosmetic conditions or anything that says the phone's been abused. Very much look to make sure the phone isn't iCloud locked, that goes without saying, but I do think all those phones can be very much worth it. If you want the home button design, the 3rd Gen iPhone SE isn't too bad at under $200 or so. And then of course, the 2nd Gen SE from early 2020 I think represents insane value, at or even under $100, running iOS 17 no problem, and extremely likely to get at least iOS 18 as well. I think that's going to be the best value iPhone on the market, full stop, just in terms of what it's capable of for so little cash. And so with that, I think we're right about done here. Hopefully this video helped you out, and if it did, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tech content. I'll very likely be making a new buying guide should a 4th generation iPhone SE come out spring 2024, but if not, this buying guide should stay current for the foreseeable future, basically until the next iPhones come out. So yeah, that's about it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.